The public landscape is absolutely critical to the health of cities. And in the late 19th century, with the rise of industrialization in American and European cities, public space became absolutely vital for the citizens' health and welfare, both psychological and physical health. Frederick Law Olmsted was a real pioneer in this idea, and in the late 1800s secured the full boundaries of the approximately 800 acres of Central Park, saying it would be the lungs of the city. It would be where people could come and restore their emotional and physical health. From that moment forward, I think public parks have played exactly that role in cities. In the mid-20th century, we had a sort of abandonment of the American city. Urban renewal, civil rights movement, all kinds of different factors created a sort of dissolution of the American city. We tore down historic buildings, preservation laws weren't in place, racial tension led to divides within our cities. Many, many important buildings were destroyed during that period. I think right now we are seeing the results of a sort of tragic period of the second half of the 20th century, where decision makers' needs were met in a suburban life. They had plenty of land, they had healthy water, they had healthy air, and they would come into the city to do work and go back to their suburban life. Now we're finding with greater densification of cities, increasing population in American cities, the desperate need for public transit, for public space, for parks, as cities are once again growing. And I think people are moving back to the city and understanding the benefits of living in close proximity to people of other races, other ideas, that you have a richness of daily life when you're combined with your fellow citizens. With that, we have the resulting need of a greater commitment to public space. And I think Nashville is really at the forefront nationally in safeguarding their historic parks, like Centennial or Percy Warner, but also championing the construction of new parks, areas along the Cumberland River. I think now looking county-wide at the complexity and interdependence of parks as a large network and living system is some of the incredible work that Metro Parks is doing right now. Now let's talk about the powerful history of colonial settlement and the role that Anne Cockrell played. I think there are many stories of powerful women in Centennial Park, and it sort of began with Anne Cockrell. She and her husband came here on the Donaldson Flotilla in 1780. 1779, her brother, John Robertson, had come to Nashville, Fort Nash, and founded the city of Nashville. She follows the next year, and she is granted a deed by the state of North Carolina for much of the land that is Centennial Park, and it was the first deed in this region granted to a woman. Anne Cockrell farmed this land, and it became famous for the Cockrell Spring, which travelers coming back up the Natchez Trace to Nashville would say they knew they were home when they got to the fresh, clear waters of Cockrell Spring. As we look at Centennial Park, we see that Natchez Trace dead ends into the entrance to Centennial Park. So we have this, distinct link to this piece of important natural early, let's call it commercial history of Nashville, comes right into the front door of the park. So as we started thinking about it, we thought, well, let's find the actual spring. This was something that had been mentioned in the master plan to tell the story of Cockrell Spring, but we wanted to find the authentic water. It probably is still down there, and as we started thinking about it, it's probably connected to Lick Branch as the source of water for Lick Branch. So we could follow the tunnel, knew that region, and then there was a manhole that we discovered, and I remember the day that everybody opened up this tank, it was a concrete lid, and got down inside of it, and there is this bold freshwater stream running straight into the sewage treatment plant of the city. So we thought, this is really exciting. Let's daylight this spring, tell the story of this very important early settler and her role in the history of Nashville. So we've daylighted the Cockrell Spring. We've used limestone that gets to the story of the geology beneath the city, and the fact that geology and water are so intimately connected in Nashville. That was an important story as well. So now you can sit on limestone walls, look at the spring bubbling up through the original wellhead piece of limestone we were able to preserve and drop down into the fountain. So you're looking at the original piece of stone that would have been the wellhead. We chose intentionally to not recreate a fake babbling brook or a bucolic scene. We felt like that was inauthentic. The water itself was very authentic, but we're in the 21st century. So we made a very crisp and contemporary frame for the water, and then constructed a channel that takes the water from the spring into a treatment wetland. It's very alkaline water, so bringing back some acidic balance to the water is helped by having it have contact with soil and plants. That water is then captured in cisterns and repumped back through for irrigation. And then it's also conveyed to Lake Watauga, sending all that fresh spring water into the lake that keeps the lake clean as well. Our goal, and here we go back from ecology to culture and back to ecology, is to stop using treated drinking water to irrigate the park. So by using the natural spring, capturing the spring, cleaning that water, then we can reuse it, and eventually we'll be able to wean the park entirely from dependence on drinking water. So that's just a couple of the stories about how our process unfolds. Every time I return to Nashville, which is pretty frequently, my first stop is Centennial Park. And last night is no exception, walking through the park in twilight and seeing families with kids playing in Cockrell Spring, running on the paths through the southwest corner of the park, and in my imagination just envisioning all the work that is to come in the next phase, how we will have pretty much implemented the vision from West End Avenue all the way to the Parthenon, and that's very exciting to start to see the heart of the park come together. Now that's still in my imagination. We have fundraising to do. We have a lot of design work to do to complete that area, but you really get a glimpse of it here just 1 year in, that the public is thriving in these new spaces. They're using the Musician's Corner when it's not programmed as a meditative space. I see people in there eating their lunch all the time, and families particularly enjoying the Cockrell Spring area. Now, I don't know if they notice or appreciate the improvements to the parking lot at the Parthenon, but I get very excited when I'm there and seeing the clarity of wayfinding, the minimum use of asphalt, and the kind of exuberant horticulture that's also doing this job of cleaning the water. One of the most gratifying things about phase one being completed is I have friends who have small kids, and I get emails from them all the time now, photographs of their kids playing in Cockrell Spring and using the park, and that's just a great reminder of why we do all this work, is that it's really starting to transform the lives of people who live in Nashville, young and old. But particularly it's gratifying to see the kids enjoying it so much. I find particular inspiration in the piece of the project concerning the daylighting of Cockrell Spring. It's very symbolic to me that we went from an era of the second half of the 20th century of burying natural water bodies, pouring sewage and industrial waste into those bodies of water and letting them go straight to the river. We also ignored stories of the disenfranchisement of women and minorities. I think the spring, particularly as it relates to Anne Cockrell, an early pioneer settler, becomes symbolic of a reawakening of women's equal rights, of ecological equal rights, where we are stewards of the natural waters that flow through our city. We care for them in a new way. And this is a beautiful way to kind of make a metaphor for these very important cultural factors today, but they're tied to this very symbolic act of daylighting a spring that had been buried. Phase two is a very critical phase for the park. We would consider it the heart of the park. With the front door established, we now need to draw people deeper into the park with the improved amenities at the same level of quality of phase one. The scope is ambitious. It is to reconstruct and improve the great lawn that is off of the colonnade of the Parthenon that stretches all the way toward West End Avenue. Now that is a beloved play space. We want it to remain a beloved play space, but we want it to drain properly, heal itself quickly after large events, tented events or athletic events, using the highest standards possible for ground preparation, drainage, and irrigation to have the most sustainable and resilient lawn possible. We're really imagining it as the front yard of Nashville. It's the front lawn of the city. And we want people to come and enjoy it and use it enthusiastically, and it needs a lot of work. I mean, right now it's really compacted clay soils with sort of impoverished grass, and in order to rebuild that, it's believe it or not, a major construction project to dig down, loosen the soils, add amendments that will add to its longevity and its quality enormously. Flanking both sides of the Great Lawn, we have proposed a double line of oaks, tulip poplars, hickories, and maples that will be an allée, we call it, a double line of trees that go to the two ends of the Parthenon. So that will be the kind of formal structure of the Great Lawn. We're also proposing to prepare the soils for those trees so that they can get to 200, 300 years old. So we'll have these massive trees eventually, long after I'm dead. But by carefully preparing the soil and expecting craft shows, art fairs, all kinds of people and events happening under the shade of these trees, we're structuring the soil such that they can take that compaction. One of the lethal things for trees is even foot traffic compacts the trees. They need to get oxygen to the roots. So compaction is one of the greatest negative impacts on trees. So by carefully designing it now for the next century, we can really get this right. It might be one of those things that there's so much technology underground and people don't see it as that different, but their children and their grandchildren will see the benefits of this investment. Another part of Phase 2 is going to be the events pavilion. Now, with public parks, you try to replace an amenity before you remove an old amenity. So we have the croquet shelter, where people have picnics and host corporate retreats and luncheons and that sort of thing. And so we're building the replacement for that as an events pavilion as part of Phase 2. Phase 2 is in design at this point. We will continue the design work for the Great Lawn and the allées and the renovation of the band shell and the events pavilion through next summer. So the end of summer of 2017, we'll deliver the drawings. The Great Lawn will probably be a year under construction, and then as funds are raised, the next portions of Phase 2 will be implemented. And those include the events pavilion overlooking Lake Watauga and looking to the Parthenon, the entire perimeter of gardens surrounding Lake Watauga, and rebuilding the edge of the lake, which if you've visited, you've seen it's crumbling and it's not in good shape. So we'll have a consistent design for the perimeter of the lake. And the character of those gardens will be an extraordinary counterpoint to the Great Lawn, in that they will be a really immersive quality in the beautiful native plants of Tennessee. So flowering shrubs and perennials and flowering trees, and it will really be that kind of bucolic, strolling gardens surrounding the lake. And part of that is to replace the parking lots that are in that zone down below the level of the park, so that we have plenty of parking, but it's just not in the center of the park anymore. One of the remarkable things about working in large-scale public parks is that you have to take a very, very long vision. You do a lot of research into the deep past that I've talked about, but you're building a long-term future. And that future should be resilient and evident and beautiful 100 years from now. Those things don't happen overnight. They also take very strategic funding. So when I think about what the park will look like in 20 years, I envision the complete implementation of the master plan, a park rich with arts facilities, immersive landscape experiences of water and horticulture and athletic play, children's gardens. It will be a really rich tapestry of offerings for the entire city, but never cluttered, never random, but built according to these very solid principles that we are the stewards of the culture of this city and the ecology of this city for the centuries to come. I feel like the protection of our public urban parks is actually an urgent matter in the 21st century. They are, in fact, some of the last truly democratic terrain that we have. You don't have to buy anything to sit in Centennial Park. That is rarer and rarer in our current society, where you have to sort of buy a coffee to sit on a sidewalk outside of a cafe, for example. And so I feel that the protection of democratic space in America is a very urgent matter. So if I were speaking to someone for 2 minutes about Centennial Park, I would remind them that these public spaces, in particular Centennial Park, hold their own history. The history of this place, even if you've newly moved here, it becomes your history. You belong to Nashville. And my hope with such an historic park is, again, that we're not recreating any moment in history. We're not recreating the Expo. We're not recreating Ann Cockrell's farm. We're not recreating the West End track that was the horse racing facility that was there prior to the Expo. But we are drawing inspiration from all of those stories to make a resilient and beautiful park for the 21st century. So their individual support is absolutely critical. One other thing I would make clear is that as across the United States, we have dramatically cut budgets for our maintenance and care of the public landscape. We have deferred maintenance of our national parks across the US and also our city parks. It is no longer tenable to expect those organizations single-handedly to keep up the maintenance and care of all of our public space as we demand reduced taxation and we cut the budgets of public parks. So this has led to the flourishing of conservancies and public-private partnerships where citizens say, we must do better, and they raise the money to help support the city government in its care of their public spaces. And so I would send that message quite urgently, that it's up to each of us to contribute to the extent that we can, not only in our participation in the life of the park, but also through donations to support the long-term vision of this park and its quality for future generations.